Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to take a look at how you can dynamically add chapter markers that can be used in YouTube to a file or to a live stream event as it takes place. So this would let you, as you're watching some type of event occur, add chapter markers and even add titles for those chapters. So before we get there, let me start by saying thank you, everybody, for your patience with getting to this show. I want to invite all of you, if you have any questions, any comments, just post them below and we'll try to get to everything live. And if you want to join us live on air here, then please just, click on the link in the show notes. There's also the URL here on the screen, and we'll get you on with us. So let me frame this up a little bit. So give me a second here. So if I look at all of this here, the core of what we want to do is to be able to create a file with the chapter markers that we would use when we just set up a description inside of YouTube. So let me go into a little bit of detail and then we'll jump into the comments that I have over here. So inside of YouTube, when you give your description of the YouTube, whether it's a live stream or whether it's a pre-recorded file, you actually can add a list at the bottom of that file, which has time offsets and chapter names. So I have an example over here from a video we did on basically a streaming camera from PTZ Optics that we had for a tracking camera from PTZ Optics. And this should give you a good idea. So essentially, what you can do is you can put something at the end of your YouTube description that says, this is the offset from the start of the video, and this is the name that I'm assigning to that. And this offset name pairs become chapters. You can actually navigate chapter to chapter inside the YouTube interface. And so each one of these now can actually just represent an easy navigation path for somebody that wants to move through your video to specific sections of interest. So that's where, that's basically what we're going to be creating here. And we're doing that with two scripts inside of vMix and a data set that we are taking from an XML file, from a XLS file, an Excel file that will allow you to set up all the chapter names that you want associated with each one of the chapters that you add. So I'll jump into the vMix in a second, but we do have some comments here, so I want to make sure we get to everybody. So Kyle Gunderman, hello. Thank you, Kyle. Great to have you here. Definitely appreciate you joining. So Guy, yes, the debugging has been effective. So it definitely feels good to be back here. So thank you, Guy. You demand. Thank you. I appreciate that, you. Good to be back. And Spatial. Hello, Spatial. Always good to see you here. Thank you. Okay, so let me jump over to the vMix screen over here now. And I'm going to just push this up here so I can. So this is a very sparse preset that I put together here. But the goal really is just to focus more on the scripting and some of the structural stuff. So as I mentioned, this could be something that you see up here, which would be like your live stream. You're watching everything that's going on. And then every time something new comes up, we give you the ability to add a marker. And we're doing that all through scripting. But part of this, as I mentioned, is we're taking the titles out of an Excel file. So if I switch over to my other screen here, this Excel file is really simple. I have the heading of chapter title, and then I have with saying this is a typical sort of worship service that people may have. So this is basically all of the standard points in that worship service that I would want to tag. So effectively, all the chapters that I'd want to add to this service stream. So with that, switch back to vMix over here. And what I would do is I'd go to my data source manager. And effectively, all I'm doing here is I've generated a data source called chapters. Here's where the XLS file is. And I'm using, the first row as the column name. And that's it. So I am just taking what we had in that Excel file, and now I'm bringing it into vMix. And so I have, like right now, you can see I have the ability to sort of navigate through that. So that will let me, as I go from row to row, have the new chapter names that I need. And so now all I need to do is be able to, create a file that leverages this and leverages timestamps. And that's where we'll get to next here. So let me close this up. And I'm going to go over to, let me see if I can, sorry, a little hard to see over here. So if I can, I'm going to go over to my Visual Studio, and we'll take a look over here. So in Visual Studio, I have two functions that we're going to use, two scripts here. The first one is the one that indicates the start of the stream. So what we have to do, as I mentioned, is we have to create a time offset. So when did the stream start? And then every time I add a marker, that marker file now goes into the a file that we create with this time offset and the name. So to start this off, what I'm doing is I'm saying I really need to just get a base time. This is my initial time that the stream starts. And because I have no way to sort of store that generically at a code level, I have to create a string version of this, sort of convert it to that timestamp to a string that I can then store in a dynamic value that I can read when we actually want to make each one of the chapter marks, because I'll use that to say, here's where I started, what time am I at now, and do the time math for that to create the offsets. So that's basically what I'm defining here. This is the file that we're going to be setting up. It's just called chapters.txt, and I have it here on my system. And now all I'm doing is I'm saying, take and grab the current time, with a date time function with universal timecode now, whatever this moment is. And I then store it as a string in a specific format. So, this is basically, year, month, day, and then hour, minute, seconds. And seconds is fine for what we want to do here. So that gives me, that sort of initial footprint. And then I just save that as a dynamic value so I can use it later on. And I go and create a new file. So this is something that basically there are a whole set of file functions inside of VB.NET. And so I'm doing is saying, basically in a file create, dispose of it. So if this file exists, just delete it and create a new one. And that's all this does. So when you see your stream appear, you can actually we have this set up to a shortcut that runs the script and creates that timestamp. And so that's all we do. We've now sort of put our baseline here in time is when our video started. So that's what we're doing for the start stream. Then everything else we do is to add the chapter markers. So this is a little more complicated because we're doing a few more things in this, but it basically follows the same basic constructs. So we have everything here that we need for our base time, and that's what we're going to pull out from the dynamic value. And I have two other things here. One's called click time. So that's when I'm saying I want this new chapter. I clicked on my button to say create a new chapter. But the other thing to keep in mind is that I have to calculate the delta between the base time and this click time. And that is what I call offset time. But there's a different data type. And this is when you deal with date and time, this is an important dual concept to keep in mind. Date time actually is a variable that stores a specific date and time. So it's not like fungible math-wise. It's like that is it. It's this point in time. There is another concept, another data type called a time span. And what a time span is, it's an interval of time. So it can look very similar to a date time, but its use and meaning is very, very different. It is really, if I do math calculating things between times, this is basically the type of variable I need to store that in. So date time and time span. And that can be very useful for some of the things you do. And then basically what I have set up here is these are the variables I'm going to need to write the file that has this. So one is the chapter time that I'll need for YouTube and the chapter title. So now we're into the meat and potatoes, as they say, of what we want to get done here. So we're going to open up the vMix XML document right here, and we're going to start to set things up. So we have the first thing we want to do is say, declare my file that I want to use and declare what is called a stream writer. That's basically a way to read and write from a text file. And now we actually start to do all the calculations. So I'm coming here and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this base time out of our dynamic value 4, which we have stored. And then I have to convert this to a real date time value because all date arithmetic has to take place with date and time values. And that a lot of that has to do with because you span days and other stuff, and it has to do some different things in there than you would do with sort of straight linear math, so you can tell time differences. So we have this, and we have it now stored here as a date time in base time. And I'm doing basically the same thing. I'm grabbing my current date time, my click time now, which is just the same function we called, and I'm setting up offset time as the difference between my click time and my base time. So this is now in the basically the time span. Sorry if I'm, the time span. That's the value that we have there. And now really it's just formatting it to write it. So I'm going to take and say for the offset time to convert this to a string, which is what chapter time will be right here when we set this up. That's how chapter time. I just want to set it up, convert it to a string with the format hours, minutes, and seconds with colons between them. Okay, then for the chapter title, we are going to read this outside of our using a GT title. So let me jump back to vMix for a second. And basically, all that we're doing here is I have in vMix, I have this chapter title. And what the script will do is I have a field in there that is mapped. So if I come over here and I go to title editor, you can see I have chapter title text here. And if I go to data source, this is mapped to my XLS file import that I have. So this is giving me all of the titles that I have preset. So what I'm doing now inside of my script, so I'm going to jump back to my script now. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually go in and just select the single node, which has the input with the title, chapter title. And I'm going to select the name field, which is chapter title.text, and take the text that's being stored inside of that. So this is stuff that we've done in the past with GT title files, but now I'm just using that as my transport between my external XLS file and my script here. So that automatically gets mapped to the title, and I'm in my script reading that mapped value out of the title and using it as a value that I can do stuff with. So that's all I've done here. So I've pulled the time out, done the time math, and then I've pulled the chapter title out, And I've done, basically just the extraction. And so I have this now all set. I have all the parts that I need. And so now I just have to write that out. So the write out is actually 3 pretty basic steps. The first is I'm taking and creating a chapter file, which is basically a stream writer, where I'm going to here and say, okay, first thing I want to do is you have the ability to do what's called an append text. And what that will do is if the file doesn't exist, it will create it, open it, and then make it usable. If it does exist, it'll just open it and get it ready to add new lines to it. So I do that, which is the chapter file, which is the name that we set up here. So that's exactly what we're pulling in here. Then I'm doing a write line to that file. And if you notice, once I have this and this is my handle for the file, and now anything I want to do with that file, I can do a write line here. And I'm just taking and saying, write the chapter time, put a space between it, then write the chapter title. And so very, very basic stuff here. So when I'm done with that, then I just close the file. So all is set. That file is now written out. And at the end here, because I'm assuming for this particular case that we can do everything in sort of a linear sequence. So I'm bumping everything. So I'm reading the first row, then the second row. So at the end of writing that first chapter marker, I bump my data source row to the next row, which should be the next chapter title. And that's it. So this actually has a lot of different potential use cases, but in terms of how we've set this up as our chapters, let me sort of jump over here. I have the file here, and this is the actual file that we are writing to. So if I came back and said, let me add a new chapter, I would just press, basically activate the, set a new chapter. And when I press that, I now write a file out which says, okay, these are the minutes and the seconds since the start of my file, since I initialized it. And the title was for this chapter is opening song. And so if I actually jump over to vMix again, you can see that inside of my vMix UI, I've already bumped to my next row in the data set for gathering prayer. So now if I jump back here and I go to add that, you'll see now that that's there. And so everything that I'm doing as I go through this now, I can just I'm not going to, each one of these things now get added every time I say, let's go and add a new chapter marker. So that's one possible way to handle this, where each one of these things becomes a sequence, and I just know the order of things. So all I really need to do is put a mark when each one of these components of the event that I'm handling is handled, is sort of taking place. And that will let me do that type of sequential chapter creation. But you may actually have something different. You may turn around and say, I have 4 or 5 different types of things, like this is a song, this is an experiment, this is a whatever you want to have here. So you could set those up in advance, pick whatever data row you want with just that sort of song, experiment, lighting show, whatever's going to take place during the event that you'd be streaming, and just sort of pick that event coming up and say, now insert a chapter marker. So if I go back here, and I can just sort of show that again, if I go back to this, let me initialize it. So now I've cleared it all out. And that's what that first script did with the initialization. So now, if I wanted to, I'm going to say, do topic 3 here, which is celebration song, and I'm going to add a new chapter. Then I'm going to say, let's do number 1, which is opening song, and I'll add a new chapter. So now I get to sort of pick what I want to use for that chapter name, and it will still do all the math and do it the same way. So different ways to do this. And as an example, where this could be, a real use case, because the other was a little sort of frivolous the way I described it. Say you had panelists, and every time a different panelist was speaking, you wanted to just put a marker that it was Mary speaking, Bob speaking, Joe speaking, Fred speaking, that sort of thing. You could actually have all the panelist names and use this for that. So you just, okay, this is this person speaking. And you are just creating a text file. So when you are done at the end of the event, you do have just a text file sitting there that you can open, copy, and paste into your YouTube description. And I think that's the real value. It sort of sets you up with, this is, at least at a rough level, these are all the chapters that we have for this production. Then you can sort of jump to a chapter inside of YouTube once you sort of paste this, jump chapter to chapter, and then make adjustments. So you say, I want this to be 2 seconds earlier, I want this to be a second later, whatever. You could go in, but now the bulk of the work is done. So right now you're like, I'm right at the start of this, and maybe I make any adjustments I want, but it should make the process of generating these chapter markers much, much faster. So that was everything that I have for today on this. Let me see. We may have a couple more comments. And Guy came up with something else. So, this is just another excellent way. Instead of going the XML route. So, thank you, Guy. That is simpler. I tend to think in a sort of a consistent way on certain things, and there are usually a lot better ways to do stuff. So I appreciate that. Thanks, Guy. So, but this, some of the key takeaways from this is that you can write stuff to files that you want to be able to use later. So there's a set of file writing capabilities sort of we highlighted here that are inside of the code that you can use. And that can be very, very useful for certain things. The other is that you can do time arithmetic on things and use that. Clearly, the chapters is sort of an obvious use case, but there could be other things where you're just trying to, work with understanding time deltas, whether it's for, balancing people talking at an event or other things, but this sort of gives you the ability to do that. So, this could be something where every time somebody starts to speak, you're just writing out when did they start, and then when the next person starts, you have a file that you could do math on, basically to say, did I give everybody enough time, and balance it out. So other types of things you can do, but those are two things we really haven't done in the past with code. So thought those would both be interesting. So okay, let's see. Oh, we have a couple more. We have Michael from Denmark. Michael, always good to see you. Thank you for reaching out to me. Well, I was right. Definitely appreciate that as well. So thank you. And Guy, just saying not better, but an alternative. So yes, as I tell everybody, there are so many different ways with code to do the same thing that it gives you a lot of flexibility and a lot of ways to be creative. So thanks, Guy. All right. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to wrap this up and we'll jump into the post show. We can talk about anything you would like. But I do want to just, make note. A couple of weeks ago at the beginning of June, I ended up in the emergency room with a heart attack and ended up, being off my feet for like 3 weeks almost. So now I'm working my way back. Luckily it was not major. So, but it did take me out of the game for a little bit, and definitely was an eye opener for me. So that was why I haven't been around. And for everybody that's reached out to me, I am humbled and incredibly appreciative. But because of this, though, I am probably not going to be able to do shows on a regular schedule, sort of for the next, probably next couple of months. But I'm definitely going to try to be at some level of consistency, putting out live shows and, do what we can prior to kicking off season 5, which will probably now schedule out to the fall. But again, so I'm not exactly sure when the next show is going to be. 2 or 3 weeks is probably a general estimate, but it really depends on how things are going with me, health-wise and energy-wise. But I want you all to know that you are important, and I want I definitely want to have the show back on a consistent basis as soon as possible. So with that, I will see everybody. If you can't join us for the post show, I'll see everybody at the next show. And if not, I'll see you in a minute. Well, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the post show. So Guy was asking, what if one did this while live streaming? What start reference would one take? The delay between send and actual YouTube receive. So this is something that I thought of. I wasn't trying to make this overly complicated, but my take on how to handle this would be that I decouple. Well, first, let me in the scripting, I decoupled the init piece where you actually create the base time frame. I decoupled that from the streaming, so I didn't push them together. And my thinking was that inside of your YouTube viewer, you would probably see when that stream was up and you could press the button. So that would be one way to sort of sync that. But for a more accurate way to handle this, because that could have some, sort of slosh time in the middle where it didn't necessarily line up perfectly. I was thinking of letting you take and parse the file that was created with the time delta that you could dial in, and it would just adjust everybody accordingly. Didn't have the time to really get something like that in, but I know exactly what you're talking about, Guy, where you don't really know in the same way where that zero start time is. But the thinking was, if I could effectively turn around and say, here's an offset that I want to use for everything. So when I get all the timestamps, I could just go in and say, I'll line up the first one, see how far off it is, and then just make that as an adjustment. Then all of them will adjust and go to place. But because it's a text file and not something that's sort of embedded in the video stream in some way, making adjustments like that are fairly straightforward. It's really just, copy and paste for the file that's going to have these chapter markers. So, but I agree. It's that is a challenge that you'd have to resolve in a real world use case of some kind. Unless you were just willing to go in, if there weren't going to be a lot of chapters, just go in and say, okay, it gets me in the area, and then I just make a small adjustment to each of them. But yes, that's a real world issue you'd have to deal with in applying this. Okay. So, Kevin, thank you. He's saying that he's, sending healing vibes my way, which I very much appreciate. So thank you, Kevin. Really do appreciate that. So let's see. Is there anything else that I wanted to cover here? Basically, as we've been going through what we want to cover in this next season, I've been trying to, narrow in on hone in on a few different topics. So what I probably will be doing, over July is just sort of firming up topically the things we want to include as topics for the show, and see where we get from there. With actual show, a show calendar for all the things we want to do. But I'm going to share that with everybody, as we get close, because I know people have made a lot of suggestions for things to cover. Some of them more general, some of them more specific. But this will hopefully, I'll be able to use that feedback and then sort of weigh in the different things we'd want to do show to show. But that's it. I don't really, as I said, this is my first show back after a while. So I definitely want to, I didn't want to overdo it here and sort of go into some massively long or complex show. But hopefully you found everything we did here interesting enough. And Michael says, and he got late to the show. Would the timestamp file be useful after the show in editing the video file of the show? For as an example, anything like if you wanted to use this as sort of an EDL or something of that sort, as long as you could create it as a text file, which most EDL files should. An EDL is an edit decision list. It's sort of in sort of the old school days. This is all the marks you did to say these are all the timestamps that I want for edits that I'm going to do with my file. You move tape around and did all this stuff. So they call that an edit decision list or an EDL. So you could do that type of stuff with that. So anything that you'd want to use time cues around, you could definitely use it for that. And as I mentioned, just other things where if you want to do time math, where I could just turn around and measure the time between each person talking and do things to balance a panel. So, somebody could sit there and go, if you're doing sort of real-time math on this, you could just be pulling that out, or even do things like write it to a Google Sheets or something like that and do calculations on there to make sure you're calling on everybody across a panel and giving them sufficient time to answer. So things like that. But yes, this would be something you could definitely do. And, the math is there, so it's just a question of how you want to apply it. And when you create a file, you can do lots of stuff with that after the fact as well. All right, then. So, again, I want to thank everybody for joining me today. It's really good to be back. And I guess we're going to call it a wrap for today. And as I said, I will try to give as much heads up notice when we're doing the next show, but they won't be sort of that regular every 2 weeks that we were doing between seasons. And for that, I apologize, but as soon as I am back to form for everything that needs to be done, the show will be back on track and we'll have a good fixed schedule again. So until my next show, thank you, everybody, and be safe, be well. I will see you then.